Neither Trump nor Desantis will get the GOP nomination. Inevitably, there comes a rebellion against inevitability. Voters have been told that Donald Trump is the all-but-inevitable Republican nominee and that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, operating atop a mountain of cash, will inevitably be Trump's only significant challenger. Voters, however, become contrary when told that the game's outcome is known in the top of the first inning. Hence what G.K. Chesterton called the game of cheat the prophet. People listen politely to explanations of what is inevitable, then make something else happen. The 2024 Republican nomination question was supposed to be, could anyone harpoon the great orange whale? Who knew that he would harpoon himself, repeatedly? Or that DeSantis, playing Captain Ahab, would pay Trump the sincerest form of flattery by imitating his persona as an unhappy warrior? The nation is dispirited by the prospect of an all-too-familiar binary choice, between Joe Biden and Trump. Republicans might soon recoil from another, between Trump and DeSantis. Both candidacies are brittle. Trump, as stale as a month-old crust of sourdough, is running to win the 2020 election. His crybaby crusade might cause even his star-spangled supporters to wonder how to square their proclaimed love of the nation with their hero's insistence that it is so saturated with corruption that his landslide win could be erased without a peep from courts. Including some with his, how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless judge, appointees. Trump's self-harpooning includes expressing contempt for Iowa's popular governor, Kim Reynolds, because she refuses to endorse him, even though he alone, he says, is responsible for her election. And he is too grand to appear with rival candidates at events, perhaps even the August 23 debate in Milwaukee. In the 1980 campaign, Ronald Reagan, who was not considered the inevitable GOP nominee, made only 8 Iowa campaign appearances, spending a total of 49 hours in the state, according to Stephen F. Haywood's The Age of Reagan, The Fall of the Old Liberal Order, 1964 to 1980. And Reagan skipped the Des Moines Register's January 5 debate, which 58% of Iowa voters watched. Voters do not dislike inevitabilities more than they dislike politicians who seem to feel entitled to special dispensations. Reagan's post-debate support plummeted from 50% in November to 26% a week before the caucuses, which he lost to George H.W. Bush. DeSantis, after nearly 2 months of intensified exposure to non-Floridians, resembles a political Edsel. That was the new car model that debuted to much fanfare in 1957, backed by Ford's marketing might. It expired in 1959, becoming a byword for disastrously misreading consumers. DeSantis is running hard to be president of Iowa, or of that minority of Iowans who will vote in the January caucuses and think Trump is ideologically squishy, example, regarding wokeness, and insufficiently abrasive, example, regarding gay rights. The Republican nomination contest is accelerating, as is Ukraine's counteroffensive, the latter underscoring the stakes of the former. During Spain's civil war, a rebel general boasted that he had 4 columns marching on Madrid and a 5th column in Madrid, meaning supporters of the army's insurgency. Vladimir Putin's 5th column is not in Kiev but in the Trump-DeSantis faction of the Republican Party. Putin has 2 hopes for a less than completely mortifying rescue from his Ukraine blunder. One is the election of Trump, whose frivolousness about national security complements his weakling's admiration for a bully. Putin's other hope is the election of DeSantis, who says, or said, before retreating when criticized, Russia's attempt to erase a European nation is a territorial dispute. And whose pandering to Trumpkins prevents him from denouncing House Republicans who are as eager to abandon Ukraine as they would have been to abandon Czechoslovakia in 1938. A New Hampshire student, referring to the January 6, 2021, riot that followed Trump's incendiary harangue and disrupted the certifying of electoral votes, asked DeSantis last month whether Trump violated the peaceful transfer of power. DeSantis' less than courageous answer, "I wasn't anywhere near Washington that day. I have nothing to do with what happened that day." Good grief. He wasn't anywhere near Gettysburg in July 1863 and had nothing to do with the moon landing in July 1969, but that does not preclude him from having thoughts about these events. Political prophecy is optional folly, but, there are not enough Republicans, in Iowa or the nation, enamored of the snarling contest between Trump and Desantis, their competition to see who can despise the most American defects, to nominate either of them. Which is grim news for President Biden. Neither Trump nor Desantis will get the GOP nomination. Inevitably, there comes a rebellion against inevitability. Voters have been told that Donald Trump is the all-but-inevitable Republican nominee and that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, operating atop a mountain of cash, will inevitably be Trump's only significant challenger. Voters, however, become contrary when told that the game's outcome is known in the top of the first inning. Given his barbarity so far, what if a vengeful Putin wins in Ukraine? What would happen if Russia were to regroup, dragoon and arm 1 million men, and prevail over even the increasingly well-armed Ukrainian military? Assume Vladimir Putin topples Volodymyr Zelensky and annexes the whole of Ukraine. What would happen to the Ukrainians? We know that at least 16,000 Ukrainian children have been abducted and spirited off to Russia for, we have to assume, assimilation into Putin's captive populations. At least 9,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed by the Russians and more than 15,000 wounded, according to the United Nations, which cautions that the true count is much higher. Catastrophic flooding has resulted from a dam almost certainly blown up by Russia. Countless civilian structures, including apartment buildings, have been targeted by Russian missiles. The Russian indifference to the dangers of conducting war around nuclear power plants has been demonstrated again and again. Of course, Putin also threatened the use of tactical nuclear weapons as his invasion bogged down. So Russian war crimes have already been committed and more will undoubtedly come. But if Putin won, after losing tens of thousands of troops to Ukraine's fierce defenders, how would the Russian despot treat Ukraine's population of about 40 million? I fear he might subject them to quasi-enslavement if not genocide. This column is the third in a series about the importance of remembering the terrible past as a way of understanding the present, whether that means combating China's current attempts to memory hole its genocide against the Uyghur ethnic minority or reading about the Civil War to gain perspective on today's divisions among Americans, or about World War II to understand the implications of global threats today. Now I want to turn to what history tells us about how dictators treat subjugated peoples, as a way of showing what the stakes are in Russia's war against Ukraine. We know of monsters ghastly record over the past century. Joseph Stalin killed about 4 million Ukrainians with his forced collectivization of agriculture and the famine it triggered in 1932 to 1933. Adolf Hitler directed the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others in the Holocaust. From 1958 to 1962, Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward inflicted the worst mass murder in history, with a death count of about 45 million Chinese. Pol Pot's genocide in Cambodia in the 1970s killed 1